Okay, so today I changed the topic of what we're going to be discussing. It's going to be about positional sacrifices. I think originally it was going to be about piece placement. Of course, piece placement plays a role in this as well, like it does in pretty much every aspect of chess. But yeah, so normally sacrifice in chess usually have like a tactical connotation with an attack or some kind of way to win material back. But today it's going to be more like long-term compensation and just how to play position after sacrificing some material. So let's go ahead and go with the first game I wanted to show. I'm going to share my screen. And let me just get the chat up here. So you guys can ask questions about the game as I go over it. So this is the game that Petrosian played as black. Petrosian was a world champion who was very, very good at like the positional side of chess. He was very good at prophylaxis, preparing things in advance and anticipating like opponents' threats. And also, he was very famous for his sacrifices positionally and also tactically because he was a player who only sacrificed when necessary. If you guys know who Tal is, the player who was very tactical and loved sacrificing all the time, Petrosian is kind of the opposite of him. He only sacrificed when it was necessary, and there was a famous saying like, if Tal sacrifices, you take it and you see what he planned. But if Petrosian sacrifices, you resign because he always sacrificed, and calculated to a win. Um, Unless of course like positionally. I'm talking about like extremes like p-sax. So let's go ahead and see the game. So e4, c5. Petrosian fairly versatile. He mainly put the Sicilian and Caro-Kann. Caro-Kann more solid when needed a drawer. Didn't need to win at all cost. Knight f3, d6, and d3. So white's avoiding the open Sicilian. He's going for a more slow line, maybe g3 or some kind of king's Indian attack. Knight c6, knight bd2. So yeah, he's playing the king's Indian attack setup, which is with g3 and bishop g2 next. It's sort of like the king's Indian defense, except um, somehow I feel whenever white tries this kind of setup isn't so good because the pressure the black has in Sicilian on the queen side just builds up way too quickly for an attack on the king side. So g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, e6. So this is one of the many ways that black plays against this kind of setup for white. He wants to put the knight on e7 instead of f6, because on e7, you're not blocking the bishop on g7, and potentially you can play knight d4 one day, and then if white takes, you can replace with the knight on e7 after playing knight c6 again. So he just wants to keep the bishop open and apply some queenside pressure with this move order. Also, we can prepare d5 one day potentially. Castles, knight d7, and rook e1. So sometimes white plays for this maneuver with rook e1 with like knight f1, h4, and knight h2, and then some h5 and knight g4. If white can get all of that, then yeah, he has some pressure on the king side, but usually black doesn't sit around and just let it happen. Castles and c3. So c3 is fairly common just to kind of block out the bishop a little bit and maybe prepare d4 one day. If you can get in d4 in a closed Sicilian, is usually a good idea because then black has played both e6 and d6 at the same time. And if any of you play the dragon, then you know that moving the e pawn and the dragon always weakens the d6 pawn. So if you get in d4 as white, you could put some pressure on the d file. Okay, so c3 and b6. So I think today most players just go ahead and play b5 and b4, rook b8, and with pretty typical Sicilian pressure on the queen side. And yeah, it's pretty standard stuff. But Petrosian plays b6, so it's a little bit more conservative. But he wants to play either bishop b7, bishop a6, and whenever you see b6, that usually means black might play d5 at some point. Because if you play b5 and d5, then you might be moving your pawns a little bit too far and potentially leaving like, if you play d5 now, then the c5 pawn might become a little bit weak. So with b6, you kind of keep your options open and you can play d5 as well. Knight f1 and bishop a6. So the bishop goes to a6 instead of b7, which makes sense because the pawn on d3 is a little bit weak. And maybe now d5 could be strong, trying to open the d file up and activate the queen and the bishop. So white plays d4, just immediately getting out of the fire. The bishop on a6 takes, and white plays knight takes actually. So if c takes, I think the problem with c takes was knight b4, or some ideas like knight b4, or maybe something connected with the pawn push and knight b4. But whenever your c pawn goes away, ideas like this become very, very annoying because the knight comes here to d3, then it could be a problem. There might be some queen a4 here, which stops knight b4, but it doesn't, leave it out of the possibility in the future. So maybe rook c8 first makes sense. And okay, white has the center, but it's a little bit tough to maintain. If you play like bishop d2 to stop knight b4, then you're hanging the pawn on d4. So you have to be a little bit careful how you play on the queen side. Moves like a3 makes sense on knight b4, but then you also weaken like these two squares. So then a move like knight a5 becomes possible, and yeah. So even though white is the center, it's still black still very much is counterplay here. So he takes with the knight instead, and the point is if now we take, well, we've traded off one pair of knights, and there's no knight b4 for now. We can play bishop b3, queen d2, and we have a much easier time maintaining our center. And here white would just do much better. So instead, Petrosian doesn't take on d4. He lets the knight sit for a while, and okay, if white gets time to build up on the d file and pressure d6, then it could be a little bit of an issue. But Petrosian plays accurately and plays knight e5. So really just using the bishop on a6 to come in with these squares and put some pressure here. Bishop g5 makes sense. So the question is, where do you really put the bishop on c1? Bishop e3 might run into maybe knight c4, hitting it in the pawn on b2. Bishop f4 could run into some potential e5 stuff and knight d3 and takes f4. So that kind of leaves bishop g5, which is a move you kind of don't want to make because it's very easy to just kick the bishop away after h6. And that's exactly what he does. So again, black is asking, what are you going to do to the bishop? And it's not an easy question to answer. You don't want to take on e7 because typically in the middle game, in a middle game like this at least, where it's kind of open, the bishop is much better than the knight. And when you take here, any sort of pawn moves are going to leave you weak on the dark squares. So yeah, something like this is not a trade you want to make. But white's position has already been kind of loose with the bishop on a6 and knight on e5. So he has to force some kind of concession here. So h6, white came up with queen a4 with the counterattack on the bishop on a6. Of course, if you take here and take here, then you traded a bishop for a bishop, and yeah, white could weaken the dark squares, but now black can be weak on the light squares. So I guess this trade would be fairly even, and there's no reason to go for this if you're black when you can force something better. So black plays bishop b7, keeping his strong piece, and now white is forced to take on e7. Again, if he goes back, there's always knight moves like knight d3, and rook c8, knight c4 maybe. So taking e7, queen takes, and rook d1. So white has gotten all the pieces out, but black came out of the opening with a nice advantage because he has the bishop pair, and his pieces are just better placed. Knight on f1 is kind of awkward right now, and the bishop on g2 is just stuck behind his own pawn. Okay, so rook fc8, getting ready for maybe knight c4 or rook c4, knight e3, rook c5, f4. So white finally moves the pawn, but this is the beginning of weakening the position because now potentially this diagonal could get weak if the knights were to get kicked out of the way, and the e4 pawn also becomes a weakness because you can never play f3 now. So for the rest of the game, the e4 pawn kind of becomes one of black's priority targets. Knight c6. So I think knight d7 maybe runs into e5. It's a strange tactic, but if white can change a position like this, then it could be good for him because whenever your opponent has two bishops, a good idea to like kind of neutralize their advantage is to trade off one of the bishops. So if you take, I take on d6 now, and instead of black having two bishops, he just has one. And this is a lot more manageable for white to deal with because now black has some weakness on the light squares. Okay, white does too, but at least black doesn't have two bishops anymore. And of course, you don't want to play d5 because then you get a block position where the knights start to look very nice. So That's why knight d7 might be a mistake. So knight c6 makes sense, just to keep white from doing any things like that. Knight takes, bishop takes, queen c2, and rook d8. So now the position has kind of stabilized, and black still has this two bishops advantage and more center pawns, active pieces. But here's the part where black needs to come up with the plan. So white plays queen e2, pretty much just waiting around. Doesn't really have a plan with this move. He might be watching some a6 move, but black can always play bishop b7 to prepare it. So if you're black here, it's time to come up with a plan and figure out how to crack white's position. So try to come up with a plan in the chat, and in about 2 minutes we'll go over it. So how to continue if you're black here. It doesn't have to be like specific moves. You can just give me a general plan. So you want to play e5. So e5 does attack the center, but I'm worried about something like f5, and e5 weakens some very important squares and also blocks in your own bishop. Yeah, a move like e5, I don't like this because we're weakening d5 square, and after f5, we're making this guy very, very bad, right? He was a good piece before, but once you play e5, it's not a good position for black. Yeah, then like rook f1 and knight g4, I think. White's position is very good. Yeah, queen b7 is a good move, but like, what's your general plan though? Yeah, exactly. So b5, a5, b4, exactly. So you want to do a minority attack, basically. In this Sicilian, it's very common to use your a and b pawns to attack the queen side. So even though we have 2 pawns on the queen side versus white's 3, if we attack on the queen side, we're gonna make some trades, and one of white's pawns is gonna be very weak at the end. And then we can target that lone isolated pawn and capture it, and it'll be up material at the end. So whenever we attack on the side where we have less pawns, it's called a minority attack, and it's actually very, very common because you have less pawns on that side. It's easier to make targets. It's easier to make your opponent's pawns targets. So yeah, b5, a4, b5, a5, and b4 is the correct plan here. So it's only a matter of how to prepare it. So queen b7 is one way. In the game, that's what he played actually, queen b7. So getting ready for a6 and b5, or even just b5, a5 straight away, and also hitting e4. So yeah. Notice the rook on c5 is in kind of a weird spot, but it can't be attacked because black's pieces kind of already are looking down on this diagonal. So b4 can never be played because the c3 pawn is always weak. Okay, so queen b7, knight c2. Getting ready to defend the pawn, and maybe some knight d4 and e5 idea. So here black should be a little concerned about knight d4. Again, he doesn't want to trade off one of the bishops, because if you get rid of one of the bishops, you lose your entire 2 bishops advantage. So he plays b5. For now, I'm not worried about knight d4 and e5. Rook d2. I think if knight d4, preparing e5, black probably would be able to play either b4. I think b4 is strong here because we're weakening this diagonal. Knight on d4 might be a little bit uncertain there. So if we take, probably rook takes, and we're not concerned about e5 here because in this position, the bishop can always be rerouted this way to come on this diagonal and we can attack c3. I think this is probably a better way white should have played because at least this position, it's a little bit more clarified, and I think it's easier for white to hold, like try for equality here. Because with opposite colored bishops, there's a much higher chance to draw than without them. But instead he played rook d2, which still makes sense. He's still gearing up to defend on the queen side. Rook c4, getting out of any, well, preparing to attack e4, stopping any, like, knight e3 ideas potentially. Okay, so a3, again, just holding the fort down for b4, a5. And yeah, so here, if the knight stays on c2, maybe b4 will take a while to actually happen, but now e5 might actually work. So the reason e5 didn't work earlier is because there was not enough pressure on e4 to prevent white from playing f5. So let's say white plays something random, like he needs to defend e4 somehow. So let's say rook here, which is not a very good move, but then black can maybe prepare e5. Yeah, squaring e5 isn't so bad now because if f5 now, there's some pressure, and if something like this takes, you know, black can start pushing his pawns like this, and he has a good position. So that's one way to attack the center. You can always still play slowly. You can still play either d5 at some point. Although I don't like d5 so much in these positions because then e5, and it makes the knight, you know, a better piece and the bishop a slightly worse piece. But yeah, he would probably still play slowly. In the game, though, white was kind of impatient, and he played 93. So he's attacking the rook, but he's not controlling b4 anymore. And he lost a nice resource from black. So black made a very interesting decision here and really changed the position. So spend about 2 minutes and try to figure out what black did here. Yeah, very good. So black played rook takes e4 here. Positional sacrifice. He could play rook to c5 or rook to a4, which are fine moves, but again, after knight c2, maybe black still has to kind of break through somehow, and it's not too clear what he can do. But rook to c4 is very nice. So the point after takes, white got black got a bishop and a pawn for a rook, so 5 versus 4. He's down 1 point. But he has 2 center pawns. He has a minority attack pressure on the queen side, and he has 2 very powerful bishops. So in general, people value the bishop pair very highly, up to even a pawn. So if you're down a pawn and you have 2 bishops, you might have full compensation sometimes. So that alone could make up for the sacrifice exchange. This position is still very good for black because his position was already very good. But usually sacrifices like this, they serve more of a practical aspect than like against a computer. A sacrifice like this wouldn't make much sense because they defend perfectly. But practically playing against a bishop on the, a diagonal like this, which is so open with mating threats and whoops, and then maybe some center pawns like d5, d4 at some point, there's going to be a lot of threats for humans to deal with, and that's what makes these kind of sacrifices so powerful. So yeah, bishop takes e4, and now black's position is very, very strong. He's going to come maybe d5, and then b4 at some point. And if he manages to capture a queenside pawn, he'll have 2 pawns for an exchange. And even though 2 pawns for an exchange is equal, so bishop and 2 pawns versus rook is 5 versus 5. Usually, it feels like the 2 pawns are much stronger than the exchange. So during a game, if you can sack an exchange for a piece and 2 pawns, it might be worth it. Okay, so bishop e4. White played knight c2, going back to defend b4. And so now Petrosian plays the game kind of slowly. He doesn't play very fast. Like most sacrifices, they require you to strike immediately. You gotta act while your attack is still going. You can't play too slowly, otherwise your composition will fizzle out. But a sacrifice like this, it allows you to play slowly, and you're able to play as if the bishop is just better than the rook. So d5, knight d4, and b4. So just acting on his plan of pushing on the queen side. So takes, and a4. So white's going for the outside pass pawn here, but now the knight's very unstable. The outside pass pawn is a weakness, and this diagonal is again could be a problem. So black played queen a7, hitting the pawn and the knight, and I think white might just lose the second pawn here. Queen f2 and rook c8. So I'm not sure why he didn't take on a4. I think after there's actually a tactic here. So queen a6, white is a very nice tactic to give him a really good position actually. It ends up being a trade, but it's not a trade you want to make. It's an a pawn for a much better pawn. So white to move and recollect material. Knight e6, yeah. And f6, you don't want to not take it, because then I'll take the bishop on g7, and black's probably worse, much worse. Takes and rook e4, and this changes everything, because you still have a pawn for the exchange, but this is very weak, this is very weak, this is very weak, and you will just have one bishop now, right? The 2 bishop advantage is gone. So yeah, this is not a trade black wants to make. So that's why he played rook c8. Again, just playing slowly. He's using the open file. He's still playing very sound positional chess. b3 for defending the pawn, but now this square is very weak. So black takes advantage of that soon. Bishop f8. Potentially rerouting to c5 at some point, and really eyeing the king. The king is going to be stuck on a very dangerous diagonal. He can't go to h1, and if he goes to f1, he's exposed to queen a6 check. So the king is also going to be a target soon. Knight b5 and queen a6. So black could trade queens, but with the outside pass pawn and white, it still has up an exchange. This is probably not the exchange you want to make. It also gives white, it solves all of white's king safety issues, right? Because without the queens, then the king can roam freely like around e2 and f1. So black should keep queens on the board. So queen a6 and queen e2. Okay, so after queen e2, again, black is trying to find a way to break through. And yeah, so he might want to push the center pawns at some point, but it's not so easy, right? If he plays f6 and e5, he has to worry about his own king potentially getting under attack. And Petrosian was a player who didn't like giving his opponent any counterplay. So he still continues slowly. Queen b6, king f1, and now rook c3. So we did the second exchange stack now. But if white takes, which I think he did, what happens to the rooks versus the bishops? So takes. Let's look at all the pawns on the board. There's no open files, right? Rooks need open files to be good, but there's many open diagonals. So this is like, one of the few cases where rooks are actually worse than bishops, right? Rooks need open files to thrive, and bishops need open diagonals. So actually after this, white immediately just plays rook c2. He wants black to take the rook because the rook is just worse there. And if he takes the rook on d3, then white can maybe start accessing the light squares. But if he doesn't take the rook on d3, you know, black will still control like all these light squares, and there's no point for him to give this really powerful bishop on e4. So black plays queen takes b3. He could have played bishop b4 too, which looked very nice, but you know, a pawn is a pawn. Queen takes b3, rook c1, and now bishop b4. So the rooks are just totally dominating at this point, and white just completely lost. It's just a matter of time before, you know, d4, d3 comes in, and that's going to be game over. g4. He played g4 to stop bishop f5, and h5 bishop f5, because if the bishop goes back, then we can play d4, d3 for free. So g4, just stopping that. And now black starts collecting material. At this point, black has, I think, 3 pawns for an exchange. And yeah, 3 pawns is too many. So here white is just down material. f5, takes, g5. Black is still playing in this very, very anti-counterplay manner, just shutting down anything white has. h4. He could try f6, but there's just nothing. Something like queen to c6 is fine. And yeah, black is not getting mated, so he's white really has no play no matter what he does. h4, bishop c5, now preparing some maybe, you know, queen f4 stuff. We can't take on c3 because there's queen a1, queen e1, takes, bishop b4. So black is still holding on to his material like this. hg5, queen f4, queen g3, queen g1, takes, and yeah, this ending is completely winning for black. Again, there's just too many pawns. And Petrosian quickly wraps it up. So yeah, here white resigned. So, you know, a lot of times we just take for granted the fact that a rook is better than bishops, but the power of 2 bishops is just so strong sometimes that it's worth an exchange. And in this game, it was worth even 2 exchanges with rook c3. So yeah, there was actually there was a story of this player who, when he learned chess, no one told him the value of the pieces. So he didn't know the queen. Okay, of course he probably figured out the queen was the best, but when you look at the minor pieces like knights, rooks, and bishops, it gets a little bit more complicated. So in his games, he would just trade rooks for bishops as if it were nothing. And he got to like 2300 that way. Like he didn't have the same respect for rooks and that a lot of players do. And he played like a lot of interesting games where he would sack an exchange and he would turn out fine because he didn't just respect rooks the way a lot of people do. So, okay, so let's go to the next game. This was one of Petrosian's famous exchange sacks. Not all sacks are exchange sacks, so they can be other kinds. So let's take a look at a little bit more extreme one. Okay, this game is fairly recent. I think played like within maybe 4 years ago. This is Caruana versus Nakamura, London Chess Classic 2016. It's in a very sharp opening. Usually, you know, we saw a game where the Petrosian game was fairly slow. It was like 60 or 70 moves. This comes from a very sharp opening, right? Main line, Sicilian Knight, well, not main line, but poison pawn. One of the sharpest openings in chess. a6, bishop g5, e6, f4. And Nakamura and Caruana played many, many games in Najdorf, and I'm sure they prepared most of what they had in this game too. And Nakamura plays the h6 and then poison pawn variation. So it's the same thing as the poison pawn, but just with h6 inserted. Okay, so of course the main line poison pawn goes queen d2, but Caruana prepared a3 this game. The point is, if you take on b2, we have knight a4. We played a3 to stop queen a3 and stop queen b4. So nice little trick to prevent black from taking the pawn. Okay, so after a3, black played bishop b7 to prevent bishop f6, and Caruana plays bishop f2, just, you know, eyeing the queen and forcing her to go somewhere else. Queen c7 and queen f3. So far this all must be theory. Knight b7, castles b5, g4, and g5. So yeah, white wants to play rook g1 and g5 at some point, or h4 and g5. And sometimes black has ideas to stop g5 and play g5 himself. The point is we're attacking f4, and if this pawn moves, suddenly e5 becomes a very nice spot for our knight. And from e5, we're attacking the g4 pawn. We might go to c4. So positionally, it's a very good idea, but you're really risking your own king safety because now casting king side is out of the question, and the king can get caught in the middle. Usually, black tries to castle queenside, but that can lead up to sacrifice like bishop takes b5 and knight takes and knight a7 check. So yeah, g5 is a very double-edged move. White plays h4, immediately kind of undermining g5. And okay, here black plays a very strange looking move. He plays b4, or he takes first, bishop b2, and now b4. So it looks pretty strange just sacking a pawn, but it'll make sense in a second. So yeah, bishop b2 just to defend the g4 pawn after knight e5. Of course, white can't take f4 right away because then e5 is a fork. So bishop b2 and b4, and then knight e5. So actually, if knight e5 first, the point is after knight e5, black wants to take on g4. And the point is if bishop takes, there's going to be e5 at the end, and he'll recoup the piece. But there's a reason why b4 is played. So let's look at the line where black doesn't play b4 and plays knight e5 first. So knight e5 takes, knight takes g4. Bishop takes g4, e5. So the typical trick white has to kind of get out of this thing is to play knight d5. He wants to distract the knight from f6. Because if the knight takes on d5, which is the best move, then we can just play queen f3. And now bishop takes g4, we can just recapture because there's no knight on f6. And this position is just much better for white because black has played g5 and d5. So this square is very weak. The king is in the middle, and yeah, I think black is up a pawn, but his position is very, very bad. White's pieces are going to be flooding in very quickly. Okay, so instead of this, black inserts b4. So at the end of this line, so b4 takes. The difference is that after e5, knight d5 takes queen f3, at the very end, black has knight takes b4 now. In the other line, there was a pawn on a3 and a pawn on b5, so knight b4 wasn't possible. But now that knight takes b4 is possible. If this guy moves, there's queen c2 mate. And here white just loses a piece, actually. So very important to insert b4. Of course, this is, off theory that they knew. So with that in mind, white has to find a different idea. So after knight takes g4, how do you continue as white? I should probably pull up the chat. 1 second, guys. Okay. So how does white continue in this position? Rook G1. Okay, even though he didn't take on G4, black is still threatening E5, winning a piece. So think about after black plays E5, E5 in this position is going to be a very weakening move, right? So we got to take advantage of that somehow. In this position, there's not many options. It's in the position after black's move, which is where you have to do the critical thinking. So we got to get rid of knight on G4, right? We can't allow it to take our bishop on F2, because then positionally we'll be not doing very well. Knight F3 hangs F2. So bishop takes G4, and then, you know, you gotta go E5, though. So black has played E5, weakening a lot of stuff. Yeah, chess is a lot of little details. So bishop takes G4, E5, knight D5, or knight D5 right away. Knight D5 right away runs into E takes D5, and the bishop on C8 suddenly defends G4. So black will give up a piece at the end. I think the piece sack doesn't work for you. So knight db5 is one interesting idea, but the problem is after knight db5, a takes b5, bishop takes g4. At the end, black still has e5. And then the bishop on c8 opens up to guard g4. So knight b5, yeah, bishop g4, e5 again. e5 is used not only to fork, but also to just open up this guy and win a piece that way. Okay, so in this position, you really have one option, bishop g4. But it's after bishop g4, e5 that you got to come up with something here, right? e5 weakens this square a lot. And we just looked at knight d5 earlier, where knight d5 doesn't work. But you have an interesting idea here to take advantage of all the weaknesses that black has made. Knight b3 is a little bit too timid because, okay, knight takes g4, knight b3. You're saving your material, but a position like this is, I think, rook b8 or what's good here. In general, the knight positions like this, where you give up your dark squared bishop, they're not so good for white because you're left with like a bunch of weaknesses in the middle, and you know, black is very happy in these positions where he gets to two bishops. So bishop g4, e5, queen takes f6, bishop takes. Knight d5, queen d8. So knight d6. Yeah, knight d6 is actually tricky. After knight d6, I'm going to give you back the queen. I'm going to play bishop takes g4. So yeah, queen f6 is correct, but you got to believe in yourself after that. You can't go after the queen. You got to, you know, trust in your knights and keep the material sacrifice. So yeah, actually queen takes f6 is the best way to give black problems. Actually, black is actually totally lost after queen takes f6. The pieces are way too strong after this. So Krawana apparently prepared queen takes f6 a long time ago and remembered it during this game. So this isn't his completely original idea, it's the computer's, but It's still very beautiful anyway. So queen f6. Yeah, now knight d5, and now white's piece is just like completely come in. So queen d8. Okay, knight d6 does win the queen back, but at the end you're left with this: bishop takes g4, knight takes d8, bishop takes d8. Black has two bishops, and I think white is up a pawn, or no, it's equal material actually. So okay, yeah, white's might be a little better here. It's probably just equal, but something like rook d2 and bishop f3, rook e1. Black is not worse here, I think, right? This might be okay for black because knight on d5 looks very nice, but black's bishops do a good job of holding the position together. So, but instead, knight f5 is just so much stronger, and white's pieces are just so good here. The knight on d5 is very good. The bishop on g4 is very good. Knight f5 is very good. The bishop on f2 is very good. All of the minor pieces are doing a good job. If black takes on f5, then the bishop on f5 is very, very strong, and the king on e8 has nowhere to go. He can try castling, but bishop b6 is a threat first of all. So rook b8 has to be played. And here there's a very nice idea with c4. So white's pieces are so good, he can just play c4, c5, c6, and just try to go in. The best move is a5, and okay, now if you play c5, I can take on b4. So now the best move is probably b5, and yeah, white has total domination here. His pieces are just much, much better. And he can play slowly again. He doesn't need to play fast. You can play for c5 in the future. Maybe king c2, rook a1, and some b3 stuff. But just no rush. The knight on d5 is untouchable. The bishop on f5 is untouchable. And yeah, white's completely crushing here. So in the game, Nakamura played rook b8. But yeah, Caruana won the game very nicely after knight takes, queen takes, rook d6, bishop b6, and just rook d1. Slowly, black just can't defend everything. He can castle, but again, you can play slowly. h5, very nice move, fixing the pawn on h6. And now bishop b3 is coming, and we're gonna win the pawn too. Queen g5 check, bishop b3. Notice we can't take here because knight h6 forks the king and the queen. So queen f6 back, knight h6, king h8, bishop f5, queen e7, and b5. Just total domination. He played b5 to kind of just stop any rook b4 stuff. Black can take the pawn, of course. I think maybe he wanted the bishop c5, but the problem was queen g5 check. b5 and queen e8. So if black takes here, I'm not sure what the issue was. There might have been some weird knight f7, removing the guard on the bishop. So bishop takes, and then rook h6. Yeah, actually this is very strong. And king g7, rook g1. There's a lot of weird tactics in the position, but the point is that the knight and the bishop are, single-handedly just destroying black's position. Queen e8, knight f7 anyway, rook f7, rook d6, and yeah, here Nakamura resigned. So yeah, not often you see that the queen just totally dominated by two pieces alone. And okay, white has some pawns, but it's mainly the knight and the bishop that make white's position look so good. Okay, so yeah, first positional queen sack. Very rare, but it does happen. Okay, so let's go to the last game. This is a gameplay by Kasparov. I think, yeah, Kasparov was already world champion, so already established as a very strong player. Okay, so Kasparov is black in this game. I think this played in the Olympiad or something. And his opponent is not a well-known player, but, probably a strong GM at least. Okay, so d4, knight f6, c4, g6. So Kasparov is still playing the King's Indian at this point in his career. And that means we're guaranteed an exciting game. e4, g6, and f3, the same variation. So the same variation is a lot like the Yugoslav attack and the dragon, like the setup at least. The play style is much different, I think. We're playing bishop e3 and queen d2 just like in the Yugoslav, and potentially castling long and attacking. Nowadays, a lot of people play the same as positionally, where they'll play like bishop e3, knight e2, and then potentially like castle short at some point. So it's very flexible way to play. Castles, bishop e3, and e5. So this is kind of the old way to play. Just the classic e5, knight h5, f5 stuff. Nowadays people are playing like more knight c6 Pano or even a6 and c6 stuff. But yeah, back then they're still playing e5 a lot. d5. So one positional queen sack that is in the King's Indian is like knight h5, queen d2, and then queen h4. The point is, if bishop f2, queen f4, black is happy to go to an ending. So white usually repeats. But and again, queen f2 forces an ending like this too. But the critical line is g3. And the point is, if knight takes g3, if bishop f2, we have knight takes f1, attacking the queen, and black wins a pawn. So queen f2 is actually the tougher move, and we can't take the rook because we lose our queen, but we can take the bishop. Because after we take the bishop, we also get the bishop on e3. So we're attacking the queen for 2 pieces. And we're also threatening knight g2 and knight c2 and knight takes c4. So black wins the second pawn, queen f2, knight c4. And okay, black usually plays like, knight b6, c6, f5, and plays with 2 bishops. And I think white is just better in this line, but, it's an idea that a lot of people play. I think Bronstein invented this line. But okay, Kasparov didn't play that. He played a little bit more patiently for now, just c6. So c6, most of the time in the King's Indian, you don't play on the queen side, but when white might castle long, it's definitely an idea. So c6 deters white from castling long and encourages him to castle short into black's attack. Queen d2, and takes, and knight b7. So a lot of times black will play like a5, knight c5 stuff to kind of put some pressure on the queen side, but you always worry about white taking on c5 and like establishing a blockade in the light squares. Knight e2 and a6. So instead of going for a5, which weakens b5, he goes for a6, and potentially b5 and knight b6, which is another idea. White plays knight c1, and here black plays knight h5. So black could play b5, but in general, moving too many pawns to the queen side is not a good idea. Because now white's going to change gear and castle king side. So we'll play bishop b2, and let's say, black plays something random, bishop b7, and now we'll castle short. And now we're going to start attacking, like probing for weaknesses on the queen side, right? b5 will be a weakness soon, and then, we can start targeting the a6 pawn after black takes on a4. So Kasparov doesn't push too many things on the queen side. He plays knight h5, preparing f5, and maybe queen h4 stuff could work. Bishop d3. So black, or white, whenever white plays bishop d3 in the King's Indian, they're usually looking to take on f5 at some point, because the bishop on d3 is normally not well placed unless you take on f5. If you're gonna ignore f5, then bishop e2 is the way to go, because d3, you usually want d3 for some other piece, and on e2 it does a better job like guarding f3 and just being closer to the king. Okay, with bishop d3 and knight e2. So white's playing in a kind of strange way. I guess he's hoping for Kasparov to play f4, and then bishop f2, and then he can castle long and maybe g4. And typically black's queenside attack is kind of hard to execute because white has just so much space on the queen side. So f4 too early could be a mistake for black to play in this position. So instead, Kasparov plays just knight f6, getting ready for maybe taking on e4, and then knight g4 at some point. So white takes an f5. So if white commits to cast the king side, then we play f4, because now, white has kind of signed himself up for a king side attack. And if white castles queen side, then black will keep the tension and maybe just play b5 or something and play on both sides of the board. But instead, white takes an f5 first, and black takes with the pawn, of course. If you take with a piece, then you're letting, the 4 square be an outpost. Something like knight g3 is a good move. Just eyeing e4. And yeah, white has some good play in this position. So that's why it takes with the pawn. It's more fluid and more center control that way. Knight g3 anyway. Really hoping for knight takes g3, and then the rook and the bishop can kind of i8-7 in the future. And then white will castle long. But okay. So in this position, black has to find a way to continue, right? White hasn't shown his cards where he's going to go, but black still needs to make a move and find a plan. So if you're black, how do you continue? Notice white's king is still in the middle, so that should give you some ideas. F4, knight takes h5. So f4 in general is like a pretty committal move because you're weakening the e4 square, right? F4, I'm going to take here. I'll play bishop f2. I'm going to castle log, and I'm going to play g4. So let's say b5, castles, bishop d7, let's say, and now I'm going to play g4. And I'm going to use the fact that you already played f4 as like a hook. You don't want to take because then you open the h file, so black has to go back. And then, you know, positions like knight e4 are usually good for whites. Okay, maybe you can take on d5 actually. Okay, I played knight e4 first, and then I played g4, but it's the same idea, right? I don't like f4 because you're weakening the e4 square. With the knight on e4, this guy stays bad forever, right? Because you can never play e4 yourself. Knight f4 is another idea. I usually like playing knight f4 to kind of lure white and taking it, and then I get a very good red square bishop. But I think here you might just be hanging the f5 pawn, right? And then I'm gonna castle along and just win a pawn for free. A very important pawn too, because it controls f5. Okay, e4 is kind of critical, but what if I just take? E4, f takes e4, f4. That's your idea, right? Bishop takes f4. I guess is forced. Queen takes. Yeah, okay, very good. So yeah, e4 followed by f4 is the idea. So f4 would be a good move if it didn't, you know, weaken the e4 square. So there's a very common theme in chess where you push one pawn. So you force a pawn to occupy it. So f takes e4, and then you push the pawn beside it. So f4 is, you know, a very powerful pawn sacrifice. And actually, I think here black just wins right away. Maybe knight takes h5 is best, and then we get something like similar to the game after knight takes. Maybe black could even take here. Actually, no. We have to take on f6, and then queen e3. Bishop g4. I don't know. Probably simpler as knight takes h5 what happened in the game, but okay. Yeah, the problem with f4 was that we're weakening the square, so we're gonna play e4 first. So after we take f4, you know, e4 is not weakened because there's a pawn there, right? So white took on h5 in the game. Black took back, and wait. Or no, it took on h5 here, but it's the same thing. Takes and f4. So what do we have in return for the pawn? We have an open bishop on g7, very powerful. We have the e5 outpost, and we have a very bad bishop on d3 now. So the pawn on e4 made our bishop on g7 better, and it made white's bishop on d3 worse. So pretty good composition for a pawn. Bishop f2 and bishop g4. So for now, black is trying to prevent white from castling along, and if white castles kingside, then he's in for a storm with like bishop e5, queen g5 stuff. So white plays h3, weakening g3 square. Again, still like bishop g4 at the very least provoked, weakening g3. So there might be some knight g3 in the future. So it did its job. It goes back to d7. Now castling long. So white thinks that if he avoids castling short, then he can kind of, get out of the attack that e4 and f4 prepared for. But the bishop on g7 is still active, so he's not completely out of the woods yet. Bishop e5, again, just preventing e5. I think if white was given a chance, he's going to play e5. So rook c8 might have been met by e5. Just activating this guy, and potentially white has the hope to attack on the king side now with g4 at some point, even if it's a pawn sack. So Kasparov just immediately destroys all those hopes. And also, g4 is even harder now with bishop eyeing g3 as well. Okay, king b1 makes sense, getting off the c-file, and queen f6. So, yeah, again, putting more pieces around the king and adding more pressure along diagonal, it makes white's attack on the king side seem even more impossible. And connecting the rooks. Bishop e2, knight g3. So black doesn't immediately go for like rook c8 and b5. He's kind of still playing for the positional compensation. He's really asking white to give away his best piece for a knight. And okay, the knight h5 was very good, but if you take on g3, which is what he did, you're left with black having a very powerful piece on e5, potentially anchor for rook f2, and yeah, the bishop on e2 is still a very bad piece. So at this point, black has more than compensation for the pawn. It's as if like the pawn isn't even there. It's kind of hurting white because it can't move. So essentially, white doesn't have the advantage of having an extra pawn because he can't really use it, right? It's blockaded very well. Bishop f3, closing the f-file, rook c8, knight e2, and queen g6. So black is playing on all sides of the board. Now he needs to just create some threats against the king before he can finally capitalize. Rook c1, rook takes, and rook c8. So taking control of the c-file. So I think if rook takes, there might have been some strange bishop takes h3 ideas. Because now the bishop on f3 is undefended. Takes and rook takes f3. So he couldn't take with the rook. So queen takes was forced. Rook c8, queen e3, and queen f6. Again, just putting pressure on the diagonal. Black would love for white to play b3, just letting the bishop roam free. So he plays queen d2, not allowing black to create more weaknesses. Rook c5. Okay, so now maybe there's rook b5 really forcing b3 at some point. Knight c1, preparing maybe knight d3, trying to get rid of the bishop on e5, and bishop f4. So bishop f4, we might take on c1 if there's some tactics on h3, but queen b4, bishop b5. So now black is starting to come in. He's threatening bishop takes c1, and then bishop d3 check at the end. So white has to be careful. If he moves the knight, then bishop b3, rook c2 might also be very strong. So knight b3, bishop d3, king a1, rook c2, and yeah, now I think black is completely winning. There's no way to completely stop the pressure on b2 and also hold the king side at the same time. Rook b1, bishop b5, and knight c1. So at this point, all of white's pieces are just kind of stacked against the king. And now black can start to roam free on the king side. Bishop takes b2. That's probably winning. I mean, at this point, pretty much everything wins. Bishop f1 wins. Bishop b5 wins. But bishop b2 is the simplest. And queen takes, of course, rook takes is rook c1 mate. So queen takes is forced. And yeah, queen takes, very nice. He doesn't collect the queen because, white is dead lost here, but he can fight a little bit. Instead, queen takes just leads to mate. Queen takes, and rook c1. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So there wasn't like any flashy punts or anything. There wasn't too many sacrifices. It was just pretty much a slow game. Black slowly improved his pieces, right? Once he got the bishop on e5, he just slowly brought his rook to c5 and bishop to b5 and kind of weaved his way in through the queen side. And yeah, white couldn't do anything because his pieces were just so bad. Bishop on f3 was terrible for the entire game. The knight was dominated by the bishop, and yeah, so again, just another slow example of how you don't need to play too fast when you sacrifice material. You can play positionally and still win the game. Okay, just like last time, I'm gonna show you guys some puzzles, and you guys can try to apply what you learned in the puzzles. So that was the last game. We're now gonna move on to puzzles. Okay, so this is another game Petrosian played, Reshevsky Petrosian, very famous game. If you've seen the game before, please don't reveal the answer too soon. It's very famous, but so Petrosian's black. White is two bishops, a very big pawn center, and he's starting to play, either prepare d5 or e6 at some point. And if black doesn't come up with something, he's gonna be positionally just busted, right? If the position opens up, the two bishops will just wreak havoc everywhere. So how does black kind of consolidate his position and come with an idea to stop white's huge center, just steamrolling him? Okay, I need to bring up chat again. Sorry about that. Okay, so black to move and defend, basically. H6. What does H6 do? It creates, air for the king, but you have to identify white's threat here. White's threatening something very, very strong that, if white gets to play it, his bishops will just overrun the position. White wants to push the center somehow. So we need to stop that. Rook e6. What does rook e6 stop, though? What's the threat rook e6 stops? What are you blockading by playing rook e6? Well, yeah, the light squares, but like what there's a pawn break White wants to play right now. Yeah, so really White has two threats. One is e6 right away, which probably is very, very strong at this point. So Black plays h6 something random, then e6 looks kind of strong. And the point is if, takes, I want to take and then play d5. And then, once the knight moves, I can reroute the bishop on b2 and, swing the rook over, swing the bishop over. White's initiative looks very, very strong. The other threat was just simply, bishop to f3, preparing d5, right? Both of these are very, very strong. So rook e6 actually deals with both. So rook e6 is a good move. The point is, if you take, which way are you capturing? They're both interesting, but I think the queen's a little bit better. Because the queen does a better job blockading, and yeah, maybe queen d5, rook e8. The bishop on g6 is very good. The capturing the queen keeps the pawn on d4 as a passed pawn, but it's not really a big deal because we can blockade it. So yeah, I think queen 6 is probably the better recapture. Okay. The other threat was bishop f3. How does rook e6 deal with bishop f3? Yeah, exactly. So black can play 97 now. And 97 to d5 will be very, very strong. So yeah, rook e6 is the only move that really saves black. And it's a very good one, very good exchange sacrifice. Reshevsky, of course, he was also a very principled player and he understood Petrosian's sacrifice and he didn't even want to take it right now. So he didn't take it at first. He kind of waited. He played a4, trying to break up black's little pawn majority on the queen side. And yeah, okay, if black takes on a4, then bishop a3 and white's advantage is still very, very strong here. If 97, I'm probably gonna take on e7 or take on e6 first, and then maybe take on e7, or yeah, I can probably take on e7. Or in a position like this is, I think, good for white. Or even something simple like queen f1 or bishop c5 is very strong, giving back the exchange at some point. But in general, the bishop on a3, if black allows that, it's going to be very bad for his position. So we shouldn't play b takes a4. So 97 right away. He's okay with, rooting the pawn structure, but at least this way he saves some time and he also gets a potential bring the queen to b3 at some point. Bishop takes e6. So yeah, black didn't get the opportunity to take on e6 with the queen, which isn't a big deal. I think queen takes and pawn takes, it was only a slight difference with queen takes being a little better, but even this is still very good for black. Takes and queen f1, just trying to keep the exchange on the board. Knight d5 and rook f3. So the tides have really turned in the past couple of moves. It seemed like white was kind of going to steamroll the position with the two bishops, and now suddenly black has a very nice knight on d5, a very good bishop on g6, eyeing the whole diagonal. And if he can get a passed pawn on the b or c file, then he could maybe even look to be better. So we played bishop d3. Black will love to play b4, but unfortunately queen takes c4 is a problem. So that's why he plays bishop d3. And white just gives the exchange right back. He really doesn't want to allow b4. So queen f2, b4 may have been something Reshevsky was worried about. He can never access f1 for the rook either, so the f file is not really a problem for black to worry about either. Something at rook c1, then maybe rook b8, and yeah, it looks like black has more activity here. So Reshevsky just tries to win the pawn and test Petrosian this way. Again, if black takes on a4, then there might be some issues with bishop a3 and potentially bishop c5 and c4. And again, white might steamroll the position with the pawns. So Petrosian plays b4, very, very solid. The point is, if white plays c4 now, he has to worry about like knight b6. And okay, he has the big center, but now you're giving black two protected pass pawns because a4 is going to fall very soon. And white's playing with fire here. You shouldn't go for this. So Reshevsky just kind of cools it down and makes a draw with c takes b4. A takes b4 and a5. So black is still down a pawn, but not in d5 again. It's as if he's not down any material at all because this pawn on d4 is so well blockaded. And yeah, after a couple moves, they kind of just trade pieces and make a draw. So, well, they don't trade, but they kind of, in this position, it's sort of like a stalemate in a little bit. If black takes on a6, then white takes on b2, and they end up trading anyway. So here they agree to a draw. There's no way for either side to make progress. But yeah, from this position, a draw is a pretty good result if you're black. It looks kind of scary for black if you're not careful. But rook e6, very nice defensive resource. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, this is white to move. Very old game, I think. Pillsbury was white. Played in like 1890 or something. So yeah, they played a lot of something we call coffee house chess, where they sacrifice pieces a lot more freely than we do today, and they respected attacks a lot more, right? Defensive capabilities were a lot weaker back then because computers didn't exist. So yeah, earlier white played knight g5, black played h6, and white played h4, and black didn't take it. But now black played g6, and you might consider taking on g5. So your question is, from white's point of view, how do you continue? Do you allow white to take on g5, and if so, how do you supplement it? So white to move. Queen f3. So you're preparing h takes g5, a takes g5, and queen h3 with mate. But I'm just gonna take on d4 with my queen. I'm gonna ignore the knight on g5 still. The knight on g5 has been there for a couple moves, so black has already refused to take it for a couple moves. f5. Okay, very aggressive. I'll probably play e takes f5 and then like rook e8 or something. And your king is still in the middle, so you can't. You got to be a little bit careful. Also, if you play f5, I might be able to just take on g5. So e takes f5, e takes f5, h takes g5. And then if h takes, I'll play knight h7. And with your king in the middle, I don't think you're fast enough to mate me. Right? Takes. I might be able to take here. Yeah, knight h5 or something. And then rook e8 coming. Yeah, with your king in the middle, be careful. So of course, white's trying to attack. So we have to force our way in, kind of, but We don't want to open our king up too much. Yeah, a d5 I think is just as reckless as f5. It's, it doesn't really accomplish much, right? You can open lines in the center, but your king is still in the center. So d5 I'll take with the c pawn. And yeah, if you take on d5, I'm taking with the knight. Okay, so yeah, e5 is the most logical move, I think. And what if I move the knight to, let's say, e5, I'll play knight d5, then what? h5, going all in. Yeah, I think that's actually a good way to continue. Yeah, so e5 is the best move by far. And at this point, black has to take on g5 because now white's pieces are pointing towards the king side, right? e5 opens the bishop up, it forces the knight away, and yeah, black has to do something. So if knight d5, which is probably not a good move, I think h5 is just completely winning. There's no way black is living through this attack with the rook and the queen and the bishop all coming in at the same time. So yeah, you can try taking on g5 now, but I'll take on g6, and I think black is just lost after queen h5 coming. The good thing about e5 is we didn't open any lines in the center, so our king is still kind of safe for now. Okay, so in the game, black takes on g5, and how do you continue here? Yeah, h6, g5. Don't be too materialistic. If we take on f6, bishop takes, h6, g5, suddenly you're just lost, right? You managed to get the open h file, but the bishop on g7, okay, in general in chess, the bishop on g7 protecting the king makes it almost impossible to mate the king, right? You're down, I think, 2 pawns here, and your king is still in the middle. So here, white's just lost. Like, you can try queen f3. I'll probably play, like, I don't know, maybe queen a5 or something, and then knight d7, like queen h3, I'll play rook d8. Black is not getting mated anytime soon. Bishop d2, maybe b4, knight e4. It looks a little bit scary, but I think black is doing okay. Yeah, so, but there's something just much stronger than this, right? And just, don't be materialistic, just take the knight. Okay, this is another, even though we're coming with an attack, it's still a positional sacrifice. We're putting a big clamp on the f6 square. So f5 is out of the question forever, right? So black can never play f5. So knight d5 is played, or king f1. If black can never play f5, he can never use the 7th rank to defend his king. The only way to escape is to move the rook, but that's usually a very slow process, right? We open the h file, we put a clamp on f6, so yeah, it's very much as like a positional sacrifice, even though we're coming in with an attack. So king f1 just to get out of the way, avoid any mate bishop b4 stuff. Knight takes, pawn takes. Makes sense. Black wants to avoid knight e4, knight f6. I think queen f3 right now would have been too early because king g7, rook h8, black will just start putting pieces on the h file and defend this way. So king f1, knight takes, bishop b7, and now queen g4. So he's going to attack, but it's not going to be a very quick attack. King g7, and now rook h7. Actually, maybe it is after that. So actually, after bishop b7, maybe this is a losing move. He should do this right away. And yeah, probably the same idea though, rook h7 now. So actually, white could play 94 here. I think the problem with this may have been king g7. Yeah, because now king g7 is an issue. Because if black gets rook h8, then he's going to be okay. Because he needs to control the h-file to prevent white's attack, right? The typical response to king g7, like takes king g7, here, white plays rook h7 to bring his queen in, right? When you play knight e4, King G7, Rook H7 doesn't work because we have a knight blocking the pawn, right? We can't play Queen H5. So like in the game, we don't have the Queen H5 resource. So 94, King G7, Rook H8, and Black defends. Does that make sense? Because now the point is Rook H7, and the queen gets to come in. Okay, so Bishop takes G6 is coming, yeah. King G7 is the same thing, right? King G7, Queen H6, and then Bishop takes G6. Same story. King G8, Bishop G6, and now it's only a matter of time before it's over. Queen H6, G6. Well, here, if you play King G8, then I'll play Queen H4 and you're mated. Right? We played Rook H7 to prevent Rook H8. If you don't get Rook H8, you're gonna get mated, right? I think it holds true for pretty much every iteration of like Rook H7. Oh, okay, you mean here. King G7 here. But okay, I'll just do the same thing. I'll play Queen G4. See, this pawn in G5 is so strong to prevent F5 that, you know, Black just has no time to defend, right? His pieces are all sitting in the back rank. He needs his queen over somehow, but it's just impossible with the pawn in G5 because I can always take en passant. So yeah, the bishop on B1 is just so good sitting there pitting the pawn on G6. Okay, so in the game, let's see how it concluded. Bishop B7, Queen G4, Rook H7. Yeah, it was only a matter of time. And now G6, threatening Queen H7, Queen F7 if the rook goes to E8. So Black had 2 sack material, Rook F7, takes, and yeah, now F5. We're breaking the bishop in, and again, Black is just way too slow. No development to help counter White's attack. Takes, Bishop H6, and yeah, very cute mate. Nice little maneuver, and King E2. Once the rook comes in, it's over. Bishop C8, there, E6. I'm pretty sure Pillsbury missed a mate earlier, but in the end, he gets it done, and yeah. Okay, so really, it was really just a pawn on G5 and E5. Like these 2 pawns made it impossible for Black to defend with F5, right? And because Black can never play F5, you know, he could never defend his king. And White could take his sweet time and just bringing his pieces out and mating him. So yeah, the Rook H7 was very nice with the bishop on B1. Okay, I think we have time for one more if we do it quickly. Oops. Okay, White to move. White has just played knight H4, and Black played G6, hoping to restrict the knight a little bit. This came from a reverse Benoni. In general, the Benoni, if you don't get your things going quickly, then the side, you know, the other side can try to slowly push your pieces back. So how can White keep the initiative up? White wants to break through on the king side. The queen side is kind of held down pretty well by Black, so yeah, let's try to break through on the king side. Yeah, F5 is kind of the, you know, what White wants to get at. So yeah, G4 is kind of the obvious move. The problem with G4 is that Black has F5 maybe. And it does weaken the E5 square, I agree, but you know, it allows like some stuff. So White will have to take on F5 actually. And then we're gonna take with the E pawn. And then knight F3, something like this. might not be so bad for black. Of course, white's probably doing okay here. There might be a better move after g4 though. I'm not sure. But what white can play is even stronger. So yeah, f5 first makes a lot of sense. So black can't play f5 himself. I think if e takes, then we just start targeting the pawn on d4. So maybe like knight f3 or even, yeah, knight d5 is probably better. Knight d5 takes, king g7, and then maybe knight f3. Bishop b4 looks good too. Yeah, tough to say. Maybe queen c1 also looks tempting. Probably queen e2 is easiest, and then maybe bishop c5 and yeah, I mean in general, ef5 is not that good because we can even just play solely against the d4 pawn too. The main concern for white is actually g6 f5 because black keeps the center intact. And the question is, how do you continue here though? Because if black has to play like, king h8, rook g8, and e5, he keeps the center and he's up a pawn. So how does black respond here? So queen h5 is kind of the obvious move, but what does queen h5 do exactly? You're not attacking anything. And okay, I'll play queen e8 just to, ask you where you're going. Queen e2, okay, it's kind of a shallow throw. I'll play rook f7, defending my bishop. Yeah, g4 is what is the correct move. So the reason we played f5 and then g4 is we kind of created a hook for the pawn to attack, right? Now g4 attacks something that black has to respond to. You don't want you don't want white to take and potentially damage your pawn structure like this. So black is forced to take on g4. In the game, you played f4, but if you take on g4, then you allow some really scary stuff. So queen takes g4, king h8, knight g6. I think actually works. Black has to take, and then just queen takes. And now we have threats of like rook e4, rook h4. We have threats of bishop e4. We have threats of queen h6. You can't play rook g8 because queen h6. If queen e8, then there's I think queen h6, king g8. And bishop e4. The point is at f5, there's king h1 now. And then rook g1 coming. So this attack is very scary. That leaves f4. So white took. And yeah, now white gets a very nice position. Knight a6, and now knight d5 very strong. So another positional sack, but this is a piece sack. And yeah, you don't want to trade pieces. You want to kind of just go in and attack. The point is that like all of black's pieces are kind of far away, like the knights and the rook, and now white can kind of collapse on him. So king g7, he played a very nice king h1, just preparing rook g1 and knight f5 maybe, or even g5. Rook e8 and g5. If black takes, there's going to be some bishop e5 stuff. So king h8 and queen h5, and yeah, all of white's pieces are coming into attack. So the piece sack is actually worth it. And it's only a matter of time before black can defend. Takes, g6, bishop g6, rook e4, takes. And here black is resigning very soon. Queen h5 and black resigned. King g7, rook g1. And then bishop h6 is made. Okay, so yeah. This time we saw kind of creating a hook with f5 first, and then we saw this knight d5 just allowing white's pieces to kind of flood in. So yeah, so that's the last one. Does anyone have any questions about anything we covered today? Okay, so all right, so yeah, that's pretty much all I planned for today. I hope you guys have a good day, and hopefully I'll see you soon.